let's go through a bunch of examples. And I really want to frame for folks maybe what a good question looks like, what a bad question looks like around a competency, right? So,
Right.
And I wrote a couple samples down here to get us going. So let's say we're talking about conflict, right? I could ask what I think is the typical way to say. So like maybe I just know there's a lot of conflict with employees because I know they're walking into a really tough environment.
Right.
Maybe it's a tough bunch of customers, whatever the case may be. So,
Right.
so Mary, this can be a rough place sometimes. Tell me, how do you handle conflict? What's wrong with that?
Right. Oh, I handle it really well, Mike. I handle it well all the time. That's the answer. That's the knee-jerk reaction that you're going to get. When you say you want to mine for competencies, you want to add to that, how did you handle that conflict? And can you give me an example of it? Right. Yeah. So when I ask any kind of question, we're looking for those competencies, but I'm also looking for red flags. So you should know ahead of time, what the answer is that is not the right answer for you. Right. So, you certainly don't want somebody to answer, have you had a conflict with a team member? And them to say, I'm very touchy-feely, and that didn't go over so well with my teammates, so I stopped doing that, right? I would say that may be a red flag, right? So when we're asking these questions, not only do I want you to think about, as an employer, what am I looking for? I want you to also say, well, that's a red flag, right? The thing that I want you to also be aware of that I'm always driving home is compliance, right? So, if you hear something about the candidate that is a disability or something that leads you to understand that they're in a protected class that might not be evident, please understand we cannot use a disability against an individual or a protected class as the sole reason not to hire them if they can perform the job duties. So I just have to say that, up front, because me and compliance, yes. and I would be remiss not to tell employers that. But, give me an example of a time you had a conflict with a team member and how did you handle it? Two different competencies, right? I'm looking for, is the person engaged with their team, right? Which may or may not cause a conflict. Now, a lot of times when you ask, and this is a weakness question, right? So very often our questions can be lumped into weakness and strength questions. This is definitely a weakness question. And a lot of times a candidate's going to say, I've never had a conflict with my team. I get along with my team great. Then what you're going to do is you're going to shift, like we said before, and said, well, if you had a conflict with a team member, how do you think you'd handle it? Because I still want to know how they handle conflict. That is still a competency that's important to me.
Right. All right, let's take another one. So let's say I'm mining for the competency of someone's ability to resolve problems, right? Problem-solving skills. And this will become self-evident. These are canned, stupid questions. But Mary, how are you at solving problems? That's a really important thing to us.
Right, and again, that knee-jerk reaction is going to be, I'm great at resolving, problems. We haven't had a lot, of course, but I'm really great at resolving them. So
under my watch, there are almost no problems, but the ones that do arise, I'm fantastic at it.
Yeah, we've interviewed enough years to know what those canned responses are, right? And that's not the candidate we're looking for. So let's help them by reframing that question to say, tell me a time you made a mistake that affected a customer and how did you resolve it specifically, right? So give me a specific example. Again, can they think on their feet? And let's face it, anybody who's been in client services for long enough can give you an example of this situation. And what we're really looking for is how did they resolve it? right?
Yeah.
The issue, the mistake may not be theirs, but they had to resolve it. And because client services is important to our organization, how they resolved it, doing the problem solving, as you said, is that core competency we're trying to mine for.
Yeah, and I'd say a couple things. You might be talking to someone who is really just a fantastic candidate and they haven't made a lot of mistakes, or maybe they're a junior in their career and they haven't had any major screw ups yet. You could take people off the hook and say, okay, maybe the mistake wasn't yours. Maybe it was the company made a mistake or a coworker made a mistake. But clearly, not every customer is always 100% happy about everything. Tell me about the most difficult time. So if you haven't had any really hard ones, tell me about the most difficult interchange you've ever had with a customer. What was their name? What was the situation? How did you respond? What was the outcome? And and then they start freaking out a little bit because when you say tell me their name, it's like, oh my gosh, they're not going to let me go. I'm going to actually have to answer this question.
Right, and that. Look, I don't want to say the candidates lie on interviews, but they may, stretch the truth a little bit. And, when through all the interviewing training, I've been asked that by managers time and time again. Mary, how can I tell if somebody's lying? If they say they hit 150% of goal as a salesperson, how do I know if they're telling the truth? Behavioral questions are going to show you the real answer by giving client names, by telling us how you hit 150% of goal. If there's not some, really marked, examples there, the person may be exaggerating a little bit, maybe.